Hello, Pantheon fans, and welcome back to yet another community watch party for a Pantheon developer stream. This time around, we are doing Parting the Veil. It's only been a week. Last week we did the January developer update stream where they talked about what their plans are for the first quarter of 2023, and today, this is just going to be more of a kind of developer roundtable talking about the design specifically of the climate and fractures system, which are two systems that I am particularly interested in. We know that the climates are these natural occurrences that are extreme in nature, things like scorching heat and frigid cold temperatures and toxic environments. And I don't just mean the comments section on YouTube, like toxic air or anaerobic or high pressure or wind shear, things like that. That these are natural obstacles that occur in the world that you have to deal with. It literally is player versus the environment. It's not necessarily NPCs involved, is you literally have to deal with these problems, solve these problems to just progress in certain areas. And fractures likewise are supernatural in nature. These very kind of like nebulous things that just seem to kind of happen. Again, maybe not necessarily caused from an NPC, they just happen in the world. I'm sure, they're going to go into more detail, but, that's just kind of a general overview, my understanding of them. And they particularly interest me because I feel like this is something that has been missing from MMOs for pretty much since the beginning of MMOs, right? Like we've all played MMOs where, there's weather or things like that. That occur in the environment that are mostly just cosmetic in nature. You get some like rain or something that adds to the ambiance, or some snow or whatever, which is fine. But if we think about it from the perspective of like immersion and believability and really putting yourself in your character's shoes, thinking about like this is something that can translate from the real world into a fantasy world. It's weather. And again, I think I've used the example in the past where like if you're going on a trip somewhere, one of the things you need to take into consideration is what is the temperature going to be? What are some sort of like, natural environments that you might encounter that if you don't anticipate them and prepare for them, you're going to be hurting. It just makes sense. It adds to the sense of adventure. If like, okay, we're going to be going into a very frigid, cold area, we need to prepare accordingly. And if we don't, we're going to suffer the consequences for it. I just think that is awesome. I'm amazed that more MMOs haven't done something like this. And I think if Pantheon can do it right, then that will be something pretty special. And so that's what we're going to be figuring out here today, getting into more detail about how these systems actually work. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad to have all of you here along for another reaction. Again, I have not watched this video. It looks like it's about an hour long. That's all I know. We're just gonna jump in. We're not gonna be playing Pantheon Bingo for this time. For Parting the Veil episodes, we don't do Pantheon Bingo. We're just gonna listen and chat about it. So happy to have you all here. Tumaden was the first one I saw in chat when we went live. How's it going? First on the scene, got BitCrunch, one of my fellow curators from the Library of Pantheon. Glad to see you. Both are Archbishops. Thorndeep, as always. How's it going, guys? Oh, yep, the bets for length have started. We're gonna see Tumaden thinks it's going to be a 3-hour session. Yeah, so it's an hour and 8 minutes for the video, but then, you know how we do. We pause. If something comes up, we're going to pause and we're going to talk about it and try to, really, really dig in there and extract some beans out of it. Thorndeep, I am also glad it is Friday. I will say I do have an engagement lined up for this evening, so I do have somewhat. There's got to be somewhat of a full stop later, but we got time. We got plenty of time. We'll get through it. But it's not an unlimited amount of time, so we'll see how it goes. Nerds, Aaron, glad to see you again. You missed it last night, so you're gonna be right there with me, nice and fresh. Couple of Basgrim Joppa length discussions. Yeah, gonna Joppa's elevator pitch times 10. Archbishop said the stream needed more Madaki the Time Traveler. Every stream needs more Madaki the Time Traveler. I don't know if I can handle that though. It still makes me shudder to think about what sort of power that man has. Bolthar says, "What are all your hot Friday night plans every week?" It depends. This week we're actually going to be kind of like be doing a do-over of a New Year's Eve party that we had planned with some friends that didn't work out, various things, and mostly just people being sick. Like, am I the only one that like felt like everybody I knew was sick like around New Year's, and even just like the holidays really kind of like threw a wrench in a lot of plans. I mean, the holidays were still really nice, but things just came up that we weren't able to have that particular New Year's Eve party. So it's never too late though. Even 20 days into January, we're still gonna try to meet back up with those guys and we can recreate the New Year's Eve experience. Have a little party. Why not? Hey Nemrel, you're not that late. We're just settling in. We're just settling in. Still getting started here. This is the pre-show. Hey Belle, how's it going? Nerds, Aaron says everyone except me and my family was sick. That was pretty much how I was. I dodged it for a long time. I did end up getting like a 24-hour flu. I was sick for like literally 24 hours and then I was better, but which was not fun. I knew there was no way that I was gonna dodge the bullet completely because like everybody else around me was dropping like flies. But at least fortunately it didn't last too long. But yeah, that's what we got going on tonight. As far as other Fridays, I guess you're right. I guess it does feel like most Friday watch parties. I've got things going on later in the evening, but that's why we do these a little bit earlier in the afternoon. I really like this time slot, the 3 p.m. Eastern time. Still gives me plenty of flexibility, and I and it's earlier in the day, and I like got more energy and see some different faces that I don't normally get to interact with. It's like this works well. Post and Pathlighter says Lunar New Year this weekend. Oh, I didn't even know, but there you go. That's what we're celebrating. Belle coming to us from Sweden. That's awesome. Hello. Retro Dream says you're stuck at work. Been behind on Pantheon updates lately. Well, respect for tuning in when you're at work. Kind of behind on Pantheon updates lately. Well, maybe so we can get caught up. Again, this is going to be more of a design discussion. It's important to note too that anytime we're talking about parting the veil and these design discussions, this isn't necessarily things that they are working on right now. This is more about like the the design documents that have been finalized and ratified, and they have their place in the overall production plan, but that time has not necessarily come quite yet. In fact, if we go over to the library Pantheon, the alpha tracker here, we can see if we scroll down, the climates are still, acclamation is still to do, so that's like kind of on pause. Are fractures even in here? Fractures might not even be slated for alpha. So keep this all in context, as to where they fit into the like actual development of the game. But it's still, I think really interesting to still talk about the design of where it's headed. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. Yeah, I don't see fractures on here at all. The acclamation is though for alpha. Yeah, you guys can go ahead and play bingo if you want. I will not be playing bingo, but of course that there's nothing stopping you from playing bingo. Just keep in mind, like the DevStream bingo card on the library website. This is more tailored for the monthly development updates, or like Pantheon Monthly, I think they call it, where they get different developers on each time, and they're talking about what they're actually working on, and they show what they're actually working on. That's what DevStream Bingo is for. I haven't come up with a Parting the Veil bingo card yet. I don't know exactly how that would work, because it's always minus talking to Joppa about in-depth design discussion about a particular topic. So they're pretty different from month to month. So, but hey, if you go for it and you get bingo, more power to you. Thorndeep says, yeah, it would be really hard to make one for Parting the Veil, I would think. Yeah, I think so too, because unless I like would change the squares every single month to be like tailored to that topic, and I don't know if it's worth it, to be honest. But anyway, let us jump in here. Although actually, before we jump into the video, I want to talk about, very briefly, I feel obligated to talk about the thumbnails for these videos, because I know the content team sometimes watches these watch parties, and being somewhat of a YouTuber myself, I have opinions about the thumbnails for Parting the Veil, and which they reused when they released an episode of Bring Out Your Devs, which I don't know if that will happen again, but if it does, regardless, the content team lately, I think in general, has been on a roll, but these thumbnails just kind of stick out to me as falling short. I don't find them particularly clickable. In fact, I think if I was not, if I was just kind of your more casual Pantheon fan, and wasn't doing these watch parties and things, I don't know if I would click on this. It doesn't it's not particularly eye-catching, and it doesn't tell me enough about what it is. It doesn't make me like want to watch it. And so what I would do, again, my recommendation, take it or leave it. And for the content, for VR's content team, and also maybe there's some of you out there that make your own content that you tune in and watch. So this is why I'm just kind of talking about this. Maybe you get something out of it. So in general, when I look at this thumbnail, it's super dark, very plain, which again, neither of those things will really catch your eye. And more importantly, though, where it tells you at the bottom, like what that particular episode is about. It's very, very small. You can barely see it. It says discussing climates and fractures. Since that's the thing that is unique to this video, I think that probably be best being a lot bigger and a lot easier to read. I'm not a fan of like thumbnails that have these series. Like if we scroll down, like because Parting the Veil is a series, and like they at first glance they pretty much all just freaking look the same. Which I don't think is a good practice. I think that they would get a lot. You can tell like 1.5K views over 15 hours is like not great for their channel. It's not a great rate. So I think they would benefit from putting a little bit more time into these, or even just coming up with a different template that's more clickable, like they could even have, I think it makes sense to make it visually different from their, monthly developer updates, because it is different. It's a different type of content, but like, they could have even like, just like a headshot of Minus on one side and Joppa on the other side. That maybe they even reuse it from thumbnail to thumbnail, but just getting like some faces on there. It's just, it's science that we're going to be more drawn. We're going to notice faces quicker. And again, note, it doesn't have to be the like stereotypical like clickbait YouTube thumbnail, like, oh my god, like all this. It doesn't need to be something crazy, even just like a basic headshot of them. Maybe some sort of background that evokes like a veil parting, something like that. Anything like that would I think make these much more clickable, which gets the information out to more people. The Pantheon logo does not need to be that big. They could make that a lot smaller and then use that real estate for making the topic title much, much bigger. Anyway, just a few quick things that I figured I'd throw out. That's not the focus of this watch party though. So let us move right on in to the actual content here. Get my headphones out.
Good evening, everybody. This is Minus. I am the content creator for Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, and with me, I have our creative director, Chris Joppa Perkins. If you haven't seen the show, we call this Parting the Veil. So everybody, welcome. This is a deep conversational show. It's a little different than our live streams, which are more focused on content updates and visuals when we provide them, and lore and that kind of thing. And we sort of talk about our deep design documents, some of the key elements of the game.
Does he sound really echoey to you? I don't think that's just my headphones. It's pretty echoey. I feel like he's said in the past that he just has like a natural echo to his voice, but I don't think that that's physically possible. I don't think anybody can have this like. I mean, that's a pretty significant echo. I don't know if it's like the settings on his mic or maybe like the room that he's recording in or something. It sounds like he's recording from like a jail cell or something. Sounds echoey. Yeah. All right. We'll ignore it.
Are really important to what makes Pantheon. And it's fun to sit here and kind of really get deep. And I think the cool thing about this show is that we take a lot of questions from our community. So tonight we'll have 9 different community members across all our various social media platforms that have asked questions about tonight's topic. And being a crowdfunded game, it's really fun to be able to do that because it's the support of our crowdfunded fans. It's the support of those who follow us on social media, those who pledge, those who check out our website, and just kind of follow and give good spirit to all of us to keep this project going and to keep pushing for that game we want. So again, I mentioned that with me tonight is Chris Perkins. So Joppa, welcome tonight. How are you?
I'm doing great. Doing really well. How about you?
Doing good. So this topic that we're talking about tonight, because we're going to jump right in, we have a lot to get to, is our climates and fractures systems that sort of, I think we say that both of these pit the player sort of against our world. It's another piece of that. And it's something that I've been very excited about ever since I've discovered Pantheon. So let's start right at the beginning, Chris, if you don't mind. I'd love to kind of get into the first question or first little piece here. And can you just give us some in-depth description on what is a climate, what is a fracture, and what are the differences between them? And let's assume that nobody's heard of these before.
Well, I don't want to be long-winded, so I'm going to do my best to keep this one.
People like when you're
really
long-winded.
I don't know about that. But because we're going to go over these in so much detail as we kind of go through these questions, I think what I'm going to do for this first one is really just reiterate kind of the most simple, high-level concept, and that is to say that climates are extreme cases of naturally occurring phenomena in the world. When we think of climates, that's essentially what they are. But they are extreme climates. So they're so extreme in nature that they're presenting a danger to the player. And again, we'll go in more detail. And then fractures are the unnatural, non-naturally occurring phenomena in the game world. So these are things that really, this is what allows us to kind of flex our creative muscles and come up with the high fantasy, very strange, unnatural types of environmental contexts, situations, events, and effects that are going on in the world. But you're right in the sense that both of them at their heart are about making the game world more of a formidable part of your experience, something that you need to take note of, something that will hopefully allow the game world to have a layer of unpredictability to it as well.
In the chat, Kai Wingless said it's the E in the PvE. I like that. Really like that. I think a lot of what we do is trying to put the E in the PvE. So I think that's
that just sounds excellent. Wrong in a way.
Two different topics, but that kind of intertangle quite a bit. So let's start with just one of them. And what I would love is, can you sort of let's focus on climates. Go into the plan with climates in general, and I would love if you could list out the climates that we're looking to launch with, or like the starting climates here, sort of what they represent, and you don't have to give like extreme details, but where a player may encounter them.
Okay, yeah. So the climates that we have in mind are frigid, scorching, toxic, anaerobic, pressure, and wind shear. Those are the 6 climates, the extreme climates. Frigid, many of these have a bit of a common sense, kind of somewhat obvious sense of where they might occur when we're thinking about like the natural environment. Obviously, frigid you're going to find in the colder reaches of the world, but it's probably important to make the point here that climates, they're not meant to just represent a change in temperature, for example. In other words, we don't want players to just see snow on the ground and assume, oh, well, that must be a frigid climate. These are extreme climates. They're what we mean there is that you've entered an area within that biome that is such an extreme degree that it's becoming life-threatening, essentially. And being a fantasy game, we plan to really push the limits of not only how extreme these individual climates can be, but also where they can potentially exist. We want to, be able to throw a few curveballs in there as well. But so continuing on, we've got frigid, we've got scorching. Scorching obviously denotes an area of intense heat, as you would expect in something like a volcanic core or an area with a bunch of active lava flow. The other cool thing to mention, though, here is that, again, we want to do some interesting things with where you would find climates, for example. And so they can actually exist, and they will exist in much smaller areas at times, specifically around something like a fire elemental, or some kind of an ability, or a fire dragon, or places where you might see a scorching climate appear for a period of time, even when there's fire breath coming out, things like that. So it's not just these static fixtures in the world that also can exist, emanating from an NPC or as the result of an ability being used. Then we have toxic. Again, this is an area where, because of the spores or the fumes from like a certain plant or fungus or bog, or some maybe less obvious sources. So I know, like in Halnir Cave, the celestium crystals that exist there, they naturally emanate a toxic climate from them. But that's where you're getting into toxic fumes and things that are detrimental in that way.
Bell says they didn't say desert like the Sahara. They might get into this a little bit later, but I think it's worth pointing out. This is actually where I thought Joppa was going to go with this, but like, it is possible that climates will take up like an entire zone. There's a wide variety in the amount of space that a climate might take up. Like, for example, we know that the zone of Amber Fate, it is a icy cavern, a deep cavern below a tundra, below the Tenebrous Tundra, which is on the continent of Whitethaw. So you get this, entire icy cavern beneath a continent that's essentially completely frozen over. You can imagine that's going to be very cold. So, Amber Fate is entirely, nearly entirely covered in a frigid climate. Now, there might be some variance. This is where I start, just kind of hypothetical a little bit. But, there might be some variance in the tier of climate, which, again, I don't want to get too far ahead because they'll probably talk about this. But, we do know that there would be different tiers of climates. And you could get, I'm imagining personally that, as you get deeper in an icy cavern, the tier of that climate goes up. So, might start off as a tier 1 frigid climate, but then as you get deeper, you might start getting into the like 2, 3, 4 tiers. The other thing, so, you can have climates that are taking up entire zones, but then you could also have, in Amber Fate, we've seen this, where there are smaller pockets of different climates within the overarching climate. So there's a forge in Amber Fate where it's intense heat. The dwarves down there forging these like, really rare materials that require really intense heat. So it's like, you could be used to being in this really, really frigid climate, and then all of a sudden you come across this pocket of like intense heat, a scorching environment. So there's lots of different ways that they could play with those different combinations. So, but yeah, that to say, I would definitely imagine that, you could definitely have like a desert zone that is either entirely or nearly entirely some tier of a scorching climate.
Toxic also, interestingly, mingles with other climates pretty well too. So whether that's something, again, like the volcanic core, where it's not only the scorching climate, but that the vapors that you're breathing, the sulfuric kind of vapors in there would constitute as a toxic environment. You think of certain bodies of water, like in the Merc near Fairthale, or the Mad Moor in Wild's End, that have these kind of corrupted aspects to that environment, where the water, also itself might have some toxic properties, as well as the other properties that exist. So there's some cool intermingling there. Wind shear just refers really to anywhere where there's like a high wind, strong wind that would push and move the player around. we've shown this off in the context of an encounter with Sleepless, the Sleepless raid, where the storm manifests in the play area and the wind is there, pushing and lifting players off the ground. That is an example of wind shear. Any place with high elevation is a good candidate for a wind shear climate. Really anything that's able to buffet you around. But again, there's little keynotes to make in each of these, and what I'll make here is that it's not always a detrimental thing, especially with something like wind shear, because if you run with the wind, then it's going to give you a movement speed increase. If you're looking to, slow fall or glide or something like that, and you're able to do it in the context of, wind that's moving the direction you want to go, then that's something that you can take advantage of. That's cool. And then the last two, anaerobic, that just means, a climate where there's no air, you're not able to breathe. So underwater is a consistent anaerobic climate, and then there will be other abilities and encounters that cause the area you're in perhaps to become an anaerobic climate for a period of time. And pressure often goes hand in hand with underwater as well. So while you've got the anaerobic aspect of underwater, you've also got the deeper you go, the more the pressure climate will build up. But then in all of these, there's applications beyond just the natural occurrence of it. There's things you could find in different encounters, abilities, etc., that could create climates of this kind as well.
That's awesome. I think that's the first time we've talked openly sort of about being able to use a climate to your advantage. So that's pretty neat to see how that could come into play. I like that. So
I like sorry, I'm eating golden grams. I like the idea though of being high up on a mountain somewhere and you got this wind shear climate and you pull out your glider, which would be very rare if you're lucky enough to even have one. And it's like parasailing almost, just like popping that bad boy open and just cruising. What I would like to know though is if within a wind shear climate, like if the direction of the wind may change unexpectedly or even randomly. You start going, you really got this one particular spot that you want to hit and you start cruising in that direction, then suddenly you get a wind change and it just starts taking you in completely wrong direction. That could be interesting. Also, can anybody think of what are some other examples of pressure, naturally occurring pressure, other than underwater? Like where the deeper you go, you have all that weight of the water that's pushing down on top of you. It's like could have like a high. I assume he's talking about like a high pressure environment. It's like, what would that look like other than underwater? Deep caves? Is the air pressure, is that true? Is air pressure higher when you're in a cave? I guess so. Bell says, can anaerobic be in a mountain area? Anaerobic, so low oxygen. Yeah, I would imagine so. We're talking like really high up, I think that's a great example actually. Cause like, okay, thinking about, let's go back to real life and the preparedness that you need if you're adventuring in real life. You're going to go freaking climb Mount Everest. If you don't bring your oxygen tanks with you, you're gonna die because that is a tier 5 anaerobic climate in real life. And then you also have frigid as well along with that. And the wind shear, that's perfect example. And all of these things that you need to take into consideration, like, okay, there's going to be low oxygen. We need to bring our own oxygen. It's going to be really, really cold. You need to bring lots of layers. And because of the wind, you need, those layers need to also be particularly good at breaking the wind and not just letting the wind cut right through you. Things like that. You know, and you really like the like spiky boots so that you don't slip on the ice, and it gives you better grip so you don't get blown off the side of a ledge or anything like that. You know, preparedness. That's what it's all about. That part of the fun is the planning before you even go on the adventure. So almost sounds more like Oregon Trail than a fantasy MMO. Yeah, I guess kind of when you put it that way. But that's fun though. I think that's a great example because like I love that at the very beginning of Oregon Trail, you got to think about, okay, what could we encounter? You know, what can I buy? What can I bring with me? You know, is it going to be worth the weight and the money to like bring this thing that I may or may not need? But yeah, that's part of the fun. And that has an effect on whether or not your adventure is going to be successful. I think that's it. I think that's a great example, actually. I freaking love the Oregon Trail. You know, I get it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I think there's definitely, I mean, there's a lot of types of players that does appeal to. You know, just a little bit of not like oh, this is a survival MMO, but like some elements of that though to get you thinking in different ways. I think it's very valuable.
We're going to get into our first question from the community, so I'm going to pop it up on the screen here. Now, I know these questions are hard for devs. Mine has a special place in my heart, so mine's easy to answer this. But from Reddit, which, by the way, we are now taking some questions from Reddit. Well, our new community manager, we call her Sav now after the stream for Savage. But she is on Reddit as well, like sharing some content, interacting there. So Zanzibar85 from Reddit says, for both of you, which of the currently implemented climate or fracture is your favorite? Now, I know that you don't like taking favorites. Everything in this world is sort of your baby. But I will say mine first, if that's okay. And it's just because of a moment. And I think you remember this. When I first was in a PA session and allowed to show some content, I stumbled upon the frigid climate with a group of friends. And we have it recorded. It's out there. And I just remember the screen froze up. And I literally think I just let out a yell. Like, oh, this is so cool. Look what happened. We're moving slow. We're starting to like build up, hypothermia, I believe, later on. So it was a really cool moment to see the screen just freeze up and like, what did we do? And it instantly made us all feel like we're in trouble. Like, how did we get here? Should we run? No, I want to keep adventuring. Right. So I think just because of that initial moment, that really made me fall in love with climates. I'm going to tell you, like, that's something I really do love. And then, of course, that moment with the frigid sticks out for me. So do you have a moment or just something maybe that you can't wait to see players have to interact with?
I think probably the one I'm most excited to see players interacting with is wind shear, because it is potentially the most oh crap moment kind of a climate, because it often will hit you when you're on a high precipice or in a case like that. And because it does have the force and the lift aspect of it, it can be really entertaining to see a player getting caught up in that. And I would say it's tied for my number one. My other one also is frigid, but the reason is because of where it sits historically in the evolution of that system, because specifically in the visual manifestations of our plans for climates in order to make them more immersive. Frigid is where
just wanted to start.
We first conceived of the idea of the borders of the screen kind of taking on this slow kind of becoming more and more engrossed and infected and engulfed in the effects of the climate. And so I think for those who've been following our development for a long time, the first time that we showed in Amber Fate the frozen or the frigid climate with the fingers of frost kind of creeping from the sides of the screen and kind of that sound of like the cracking and I think that was just a really iconic moment and really cemented the the impact of the system. And
my bad. No, I was trying to pull up this clip. I went to the library. I don't know if you guys have seen this, because this was from a couple of years ago, actually almost 3 years ago now. When he's talking about the wind shear climate, it is very funny to see in action. And so, in case you haven't seen this video,
very quickly, as I said before, this is a raid area, and the time is coming in the near future, that we want to, actually show off a little bit more of this area for our pre-alpha testers. And this is everything we've shown today is going to be part of what the next testing phase is. So,
get to the good part.
The raid and the mechanics. The main one we want to go into an example.
There we go.
So, without really explaining exactly everything that just happened there, this is Sleepless himself.
Oh! Hi! He summons!
To us.
And you
Okay.
get the close-up view of it.
Oh, Jesus, dude. Look at this guy. Oh, and he just knocked me off.
You see how freaking high up he is? Can you imagine?
Okay. And I'm back at the beginning.
And now he's in this wind shear climate, and now you gotta. Now he has to jump over these
great.
gaps with
I
the
am
wind
running
blowing
back
him
up.
in different directions.
You've got this, buddy.
Oh, God. Wait, why is it so windy and... Oh, Jesus. Wait, is this the winds? Oh, God. All right, hold on. It has become significantly more difficult to navigate this. Okay. Oh, go. Go. Oh, nope. Nope. Go back. We're good. We're fine. Things are fine. Things are fine. And I think we got it.
Oh, he
Awesome.
made it.
Ooh.
Nice. Now you'll notice as soon as you get into the play area,
That's good stuff. I love that. I love that zone. I love Infinite Storm. Anyway, all right, little rabbit trail there. Let's get back on track here.
The work that it would do to create that kind of immersive, impactful moment when you're getting those visual elements as well. So I think because of the historicity of it, I would say Frigid is my favorite. Has that special place, but Wind Shear's the one I'm most excited to see.
Well, when we saw
havoc.
Wind Shear, we saw Co-Carnage being blown off the rocks trying to make those jumps too. So, and for someone who's afraid of heights, sometimes games get me with that. Where like you're walking over a small plank, like it'll hit me a little bit. So like that kind of stuff is like, so that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna go into our second community question, which is gonna lead into the next topic we're getting a little in depth in pretty well. And this is actually from our forums. So you can go to pantheonmmo.com and check out our forums. This is Xanafel. And Xanafel said, how early do you think we can expect to encounter difficult climates? I mean, guess whether we're ready for them or not.
Yeah, you can expect to encounter the weaker climates relatively early in general. I think generally it's good game design to present systems early in a way that can be experienced and then avoided or managed by the players just to help give them a sense of like what to expect, what it is, how it affects them. Knowing that this is a weaker version, it kind of gives a sense of like, okay, this is kind of the fare that I can expect as these get more and more intense. So we want to plant those seeds of exploration and those seeds of the way climates will interact with your exploration pretty early on. So it's our goal to have some lower level climates, but ones that don't pose that much of a threat to the player. I mean, not threatless, but really designed to be kind of more of that, dipping your toes in the water before it ramps up quite a bit. One of the ways that acclimation will work, and acclimation, we're going to get into that here in a second, but one important aspect of acclimation is that you have an amount of natural acclimation that you can accrue when you are in a climate, in an extreme climate. So if I go into a tier 1, a baseline frigid climate, and I hang out there for a little bit, I'm slowly going to tick up. My frigid acclimation is slowly going to tick up to a certain point, and then it won't go past that. If we want to put it in more concrete terms, I have 20 points of natural acclimation that I can accumulate towards a specific climate that I happen to be in at the time. And so as I spend time in a frigid climate, I'm going to eventually accumulate up to 20 points of natural acclimation.
Now, does that decay over time?
It does.
Okay.
Once
so
you
it's
leave
kind of
the
just
climate.
like when you're spending a lot of time in there, you'll get that. And I do want to give a shout out to that question because they actually asked Kai Wingless actually asked that second time they got a shout out. They're doing well in chat. So that was a good bring up there.
Yeah, that is a good question.
Yeah, it's for the most part you can expect the higher tier climates to be places that you find in the more dangerous, higher level parts of the world. But like most things, we look for exceptions. I think it makes for a more enjoyable exploration experience when there are exceptions and breaks in that norm. But we definitely want players to be aware of what climates are and have experienced them to some extent pretty early in the journey.
Awesome. So jumping into that, it pretty much lines up. The next question I have for you is, so our climates have like levels to them. I don't know if that's the best term for it, but like levels of severity.
Yep.
So first of all, if you can sort of talk about what dictates this, what can a player expect as it gets more severe? Maybe a couple examples. You don't have to go into all the climates. Want to keep something secret, but maybe a couple examples of like how that scales.
Sure. Yeah. Internally, we think of it in a 5-tier scale, kind of like tornadoes, I guess. Except I think there might be an F6. Don't know for sure. Don't hold me to that. But a tier 1 climate is your baseline climate. It's the most innocuous and is going to be for the most part what players experience for the first time when it comes to climates, and then that scales up all the way to a tier 5. Now I'm going to do kind of a quick breakdown here of some of what that means when I say it's like the most basic or whatever. But every climate has a core effect, a core aspect that it that kind of defines it. And for frigid, we'll use frigid as an example. For frigid, it is the movement speed debuff. That is kind of the essential core aspect of the frigid effect. And so whether it's a tier 1 climate or a tier 5 climate, that core effect is going to be present, but the amount that it is reducing movement speed is obviously going to increase greatly going from a tier 1 to a tier 5. So in a tier 1 climate, it might be something like, a 10 to 15% movement speed decrease, whereas in a tier 5, it might be something like a 50% or a 60% movement speed decrease, unacclimated, meaning like in its full force. And then with that, the amount of acclimation that you need to acclimate to a tier 1 climate is very different from the amount you would need to be acclimated to a tier 5 climate. But as you increase your acclimation, as you get more acclimated, then that's going to reduce the effect of that. So a 10 or 15% movement speed decrease in a tier 1 climate could be reduced to maybe a 5%. But it will never be fully mitigated away. That primary core effect will never be fully mitigated away, but it can be reduced to the point where things like sprinting, things like certain movement speed buffs can, for the most part, render it kind of an unfelt thing. But that will always be there to some extent, and that floor, if you will, is different. So for a tier 1, you might be able to reduce that all the way to like a 5% penalty, whereas a tier 5 might only ever be able to get down to like a 20%. That's
You're
like
always going to have to sort of deal with it. Yeah.
Right. Now, when you start moving up in tiers, then you start introducing additional effects. And for the frigid climate, when you move to a tier 2 frigid climate, that's when you introduce frostbite as a potential effect. And what Frostbite does is it basically renders you disarmed. It disarms you and keeps you from being able to use your held items, your held weaponry, whatever that may be. And if Frostbite kicks in, then that's will persist until you're either able to get rid of that through something like being at a campfire, something where you can, warm yourself and remove that. But even then, as soon as you leave that campfire, as soon as you leave the radius of that, then you're at risk of that happening again, or just until you leave the area and the effect is able to wear off naturally.
So, if I understand correctly, he's saying that even if you have maximum acclimation in a tier 1 climate, you would still suffer some sort of penalty, even if it's very minor. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense. Like, if you're a dwarf, for example, which would have some degree of innate acclimation for frigid environments, and then you also have all these glyphs and stuff on top of that to give you maximum acclimation. Seems logical to me, though, that you would be able to pass through low tier climates completely uninhibited, right? It would be so minor that you probably wouldn't notice it at tier 1. But then why have it? Even if it's just 5%, it's seems more logical to me that your character wouldn't even feel it at that point. They wouldn't even wouldn't even be able to touch them. They're supposed to be extreme environments. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Okay. Well,
But once you introduce that next effect, and then every additional effect that the higher tiers will bring, those can be fully mitigated if you have enough acclimation. In tier 3, it becomes Frozen Lungs, and Frozen Lungs is where you start introducing the damaging component. And so the Frozen Lungs is going to start doing damage to you over time, and the higher tier you're in, the more damage Frozen Lungs is going to do. But again, if you're fully acclimated to a tier 3 frigid climate, then you are safe from the frigid lungs effect, or the Frozen Lungs effect. You're safe from frostbite, but you're always contending with that movement speed debuff in as much as you can, offset it through movement speed buffs and things like that. Tier 4, tier 5, I've said this before, but it's very possible that you won't see a tier 4 or a tier 5 climate at launch. That's us giving ourselves room to grow, and the game room to grow. So tier 4 and 5 climates might exist, but they would exist as pretty hard gates. So instead of an area just being walled off, it's a tier 5 frigid climate, and you take a few steps in and you realize that even with full acclimation to a tier 3 frigid climate, you're still getting absolutely demolished because of the intensity of the effects and even the additional effects that those climates layer on. But that's
interesting. So, I mean, I definitely have heard him say before that there might not be any tier 5 climates at launch. I haven't heard him say that there might not be even tier 4. I wonder what that would even mean, because he's talking about you think about your lungs freezing to the point where you can't breathe. What could be worse than that? Where do you go from there? But yeah, I'm trying to maybe he'll explain it later in this video, but I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around what the logic is of the higher tier effects can be mitigated completely, but the lower tier effects can't be. I mean, I know they stack, but there's still something that just seems kind of like backwards about that to me. Where like the movement speed, if that's like a more minor thing, then it seems like that should be easier to overcome. But like the freezing of your lungs, like with maximum acclimation, you know, you can mitigate it, but you can never like avoid it completely. You know what I mean? Yeah, I'm hoping it's a good point, Tumaden. I'm hoping they talk about how druids play into this. Because there's definitely a lot of potential for that, for druids to be very desirable with they can, you know, interact with nature, which is a very druidy thing to do.
That's kind of the spectrum that we're using, and it varies. You know, obviously wind shear is going to be different. With wind shear, you're looking at 3 primary attributes to wind shear, and the first is the kind of like the first the core attribute of wind shear is that it's a wind volume that is going to apply force to your character. That's wind shear. And that will always be the case, though it can be mitigated down to a negligible degree. The second effect is in like a tier 2 is going to be the sporadicness of the wind direction.
The big, yeah.
And then of course stronger force. And then tier 3, it's going to be the introduction of lift, which is not just push, but it's actually lifting you up off the ground, which keeps you from being able to counterbalance force through movement. Once you leave the ground, you're kind of stuck moving in the direction that it takes you. So
you're right. That's going to be a fun one to watch players contend with. Just getting lifted into the air and thrown.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So just a couple examples of how, and then that's where certain gear or certain things that beyond just acclimation could come in handy with that. I've seen some people mentioning like the iron boots, and we think of the iron boots as being important underwater, but that's another great example of something that can help you in your quest to not get blown off the ledge.
That's awesome. So we're going to go to our third question here from our Facebook. This is Gregory Charlemagne. Gregory, that's a new one. And his question is, could we see climates in non-aggressive areas? Like, could there be a city or, I mean, you've kind of talked about out in the water. That could, if you're just out in a normal water area, where there's not really a lot of enemies, we could possibly see them. But could we see them in like small towns or small cities or outposts?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely. So take Sky Durban as an example. Sky Durban is in Silent Plains. It is built up, in kind of some of the higher elevation areas among the deicide thorns there. And it's a very wind-themed zone. And yeah, there's going to be wind shear. It's within a wind shear climate. And so part of being able to go to Sky Durban and stay up there and do things is not being blown off the side of the side of it. Though I would expect that would probably happen in the climb up, or the ascent up to it before you even actually made it up there. You'd become aware that you weren't quite ready for that. So yeah, you've got villages that'll exist in frigid areas. You've got non-hostile NPC groups or NPCs or individuals that you want to talk to that exist kind of in the core of a volcanic area that you couldn't get to if you don't have that. So yeah, definitely.
I think it's funny. So people have already seen Sorhirith and worried about the corpses at the bottom. Now we've talked about Sky Durban, and that's not just about walking straight. You might just get blown off. So, dangerous cities. All right, excellent. So the next question here, and you've hinted on this a bit, is our acclimation. So you talked about the natural acclimation already. What are some of the ways that a player can get acclimated to these various climates?
Right. So, yeah. So we've talked about natural acclimation. Beyond that, the inventory is going to have a window dedicated to the acclimation system, and we've shown this off a few times in an early kind of state. But the idea essentially is you are able to specifically acclimate certain parts of your body through the use of items called glyphs. And in this window, this inventory area, you're going to see a depiction of those parts of the body that can be acclimated. So your head, the chest, the arms, the legs, the feet, and the hands. And these glyphs are these items that can be slotted into each of those slots corresponding to those parts of the body. And that is how you will customize your acclimation. Glyphs are items that can be crafted. They're items that can be looted. They're items that can be rewarded. They are part of the general itemization acquisition pursuit that players will have. With glyphs, you're looking for the search and the filling out of a set of glyphs is going to involve finding glyphs that correspond to the part of the body that you're wanting to acclimate. So you can't put a chest glyph into a leg slot, or vice versa. Finding glyphs that give you acclimation for the climate that you're looking for. So you need to find a chest glyph that is providing frigid acclimation if that's what you're going for. And then the quality of the glyph is going to determine how much acclimation that it's giving. So if you're filled up with minor glyphs, then you're going to have maybe if you've fully kitted out for frigid, you may be knocking on the door with natural acclimation, and maybe with an item that provides some additional frigid acclimation, you might be able to do okay in a tier 2 frigid climate. But if you're wanting to more fully mitigate the movement speed debuff, or you're wanting to even think about being able to exist in a tier 3 environment, then you're going to need to really start looking for those higher quality glyphs that are going to be giving you more acclimation per slot to be able to do that. And then of course, when we talk about climates that have more than one climate, so again, a volcanic area where there's scorching and toxic, or deep underwater where you have anaerobic and pressure, then especially as you're getting into the higher tiers, you're needing to look for the highest quality glyphs you can find that provide enough acclimation per slot, knowing that you have to actually acclimate towards or two different climates at the same time. And there's some give and take there. That's part of the fun of balancing and kind of itemizing for the system, is doing so knowing that it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take some investment to really get fully there. And so players are going to have to make some hard decisions about, what risks they take and maybe what climate they acclimate less to for the sake of, mitigating some of the other effects. But that's essentially it in a nutshell. And
Thorndeep says, my understanding is that we'll be able to switch out glyphs on a whim. Yeah. When I played in the evaluation build, that's how it was. You have a glyph pouch, which is essentially a separate inventory, or like a bag, separate from your normal bags, where you can keep your glyphs. And there might be a limited amount of glyphs, but still, you can bring quite a few different glyphs with you, and yeah, switch them out. I agree. Tumidin says, with the exception of if you're in combat, probably. I would agree with that. I think it's probably true that you can't in the middle of combat. Although the chances of you having to do that are probably not too high. But again, when you're on an adventure, though, as we were talking about earlier, you might encounter several different climates depending on where you are. And yeah, it's as of now, super simple to just swap them out as needed. And combining different types of glyphs as well. You could have like some some toxic glyphs on certain parts of your body and like scorching glyphs on other parts of your body, so you get like a little bit of acclimation to both rather than complete acclimation to one. It's like those are some interesting decisions that you have to make as a player and figure out what the best approach is. I find that sort of thing really interesting.
Those glyphs too, they're, at least as of right now, the plan is that they would deplete over time. So these aren't kind of set them and forget them type things. We do plan to have quality tiers of glyphs that don't, and those are obviously the ones that the master craftsmen are going to be able to create are going to be the most sought after loot reward glyphs, ones that are permanent in nature. But to a large degree, glyphs will be something that you have to maintain, and our hope is that it'll help to make being able to venture into those areas until you've reached that pinnacle point where you're able to do so in a more permanent sense, feel more special and
Awesome.
Something to really reach for.
So just to kind of recap, so you have natural acclimation, glyphs of varying power, various different powers, gear. You said you could have some gear that have some advantages. How about spells? Do you think players will be able to buff acclimations? I know we've tossed around the idea in the past, and sort of this show is about sort of bringing ideas up to date that maybe we talked about in the past. I know some races may have passives or something that may help them in certain areas. Is that still planned, either the spells or the passives? At least at this moment.
Yes. Yeah, there will be some races that have innate bonuses towards certain acclimation. And it's very likely that there will be some spells that do as well, but those fit very well within the category of like,
small
rare and have to be sought after. And yeah, they wouldn't be, they would be a small contribution to the overall score. Yeah.
Awesome.
I saw someone mention like anaerobic and how you can improve in your anaerobic, or like what that actually means. You can either breathe underwater or you can. And the idea there is just how long you can hold your breath, and increasing that to the point where you can make it to a point where you can get another breath and hold longer, but definitely dramatically increases the amount of time you can.
Thorndeep says, did Minus mention food as a possibility? That's a really good question, because I'm pretty sure they have talked about that in the past. Nefel, I think in one of his interviews, was talking about consumables, and that being a value that crafters can provide to the economy. And maybe a reason why you would want to have a friend who is a crafter, or provisioner more specifically, who can produce these consumables that you might need to use when you're out on an adventure. Think about like some hot cocoa or something in a frigid climate to help keep you warm, things like that. Maybe they just overlooked that in this particular episode.
Can go without breathing.
Awesome. So you hit on a few things there. So we're going to jump. Now, you sort of teased multiple climates there. So, and you talked about a decent bit, but so when people are acclimating, they're putting on glyphs of gear, and they're trying to get into an area, like you said, that's maybe scorching and toxic, which makes sense, like you said, in a volcano. What are the choices that players are going to have to make here? They're going to have to decide like what's they want to deal with due to their party makeup, because they're not going to be able to, I would assume they're not going to be able to acclimate to all of that when you're into a little bit higher style climates.
Mm-hmm. Essentially, yeah. And those will be decisions that players will have to make based on, like you said, their party makeup, based on what they just want to deal with. Is it easier to deal with a constant source of damage intake from the frozen lungs for the purpose of not having the secondary or the tertiary effect from this other climate? So therefore, we go in here, we know the healer is going to be on some double duty, keeping
Stressed
people
out.
alive. Yeah. Yep. I mean, that's those are the give and take kind of decisions that would need to be made for sure.
That's awesome.
Jimaden says, wonder if Dark Mirror would negate anaerobic climates. Dark Mirror page on the website. Born of Deep Waters grants an innate bonus to anaerobic and pressure acclimation. So not just anaerobic, but pressure. Although note that this says innate bonus does not mean immune or negates, which honestly is probably for the better, because just completely turning off like an entire mechanic is not very interesting and has the potential to just make that race like completely OP. Like in EverQuest, you know how like ogres were immune to frontal stuns, and that just by default made them, you know, superior tanks. And it's like, you know, that's like it's permanent and it's essentially free. And you just get to ignore that entire mechanic, which I think, you know, is not as smart of game design as granting a bonus, you know, because these are freaking fish people. Okay, it's logical that, you know, they it's that they would have, you know, some sort of advantage in that environment, and maybe it's a significant advantage. Maybe, you know, it's a pretty high innate bonus, but there's still, you know, interestingly enough, like there's still some sort of need for them, you know, to have oxygen, because, you know, I mean, they're not literal fish. I don't, you know, we don't need to dig into all the lore and stuff right now, but they're not, these aren't, you know, your typical mermaids and mermen. Yeah, dwarves have frigid acclimation, I believe. Races. Oh, frigid and toxic acclimation. Interesting. I forgot about that one. And cold resistance. Which again, when we're talking about, you know, cold resistance is separate from frigid acclimation. Might be easy to conflate those, but, you know, when we're talking about cold resistance, that's like against magical spells and stuff, as opposed to these natural climates. But yeah, I'm gonna be going dwarf all the way, 100%. Bell says, what profession would you take, Baz, and why? Like a crafting profession? Oh man, I think probably blacksmithing. That's such a, actually no. I could go blacksmithing, but I would probably go jewel craft, because I am probably going to be going with a dwarf enchanter, and I think that's the most fun class to play in combat. But then they also have the aspect that, I mean, the reason that dwarfs can be enchanters in the first place is the lore of them being dwarves being great crafters and making these things, and it being very natural for them to pursue the magic to enchant those items that they make. You know, it might be, some people might think like, oh well, a dwarf enchanter might seem like kind of odd for most fantasy MMOs. Certainly if you're thinking about like EverQuest, it's like, well, dwarves couldn't be enchanters in EverQuest, so it's like, well, this isn't freaking EverQuest. I think it's really interesting, and I think it makes a lot of sense that, you know, dwarves, yes, traditionally are you know, in their mountains crafting great armor, yes, and but then also jewelry. And I think in my case though, being an enchanter, I could go blacksmithing, but I think I would probably lean more toward jewel craft, because there's a higher likelihood that I would be able to actually use the things that I make, opposed to like blacksmithing. It's like, you know, how much stuff am I, you know, like metal armor and weapons and stuff would I make that an enchanter would be able to like use, you know? I'm selfish like that.
Awesome. So let's get into question 4. You sort of talked about this, but I want to give this person their shout out. So this is from YouTube. It's Counterflesh. It's going to be, will climates be designed in a way that not all negatives are going to be able to be mitigated by the player? So you said you gave the idea in the frigid that you are still going to always sort of have that initial slowed movement, even if you bring it down a little bit. Mm-hmm. So obviously you've answered that question as yes. Can you give us any of the other climates, maybe what we can't get rid of, just to kind of give them a little bit more to that answer?
So you're not. So we talked about wind shear as well, where there's always going to be that push, that force. That's kind of the steady effect that is this consistent across all the tiers. It's just how strong it is and how low you can ultimately get that force to where it'll be close to negligible in a tier 1 climate. But again, remembering that because it's that constant effect, the higher tier climate you're in, the higher that base effect, bottom amount, that base amount is going to be. So a tier 5 wind shear, is always going to be challenging, even if you're fully mitigated.
Speaking of immunity, Mordred points out that dwarves have immunity to disarm as well, which you're right. Glad you pointed that out, because I was just talking about how immunity is not necessarily a good game design decision to just be able to turn something like that off, especially at level 1. Like, you create your character and you're just innately immune to something for the entire game. You don't even have to think about it. And so yes, perhaps it would be better to just grant dwarves like a bonus to resistance against disarm or something. But then also it could be that maybe disarm just isn't that common of a mechanic. It's maybe not something that comes into play all the time. How many NPCs are really going to attempt to disarm you? That might just be kind of like a nice to have, but not necessarily game breaking to have immunity to that. And as a that if that is the case, then I think that would be more acceptable than like immunity to 2 whole climates. Like, especially like if you're immune to a climate, that makes you immune to all tiers of that climate in all of its occurrences in the world, which presumably be quite a lot. Like, that's way, way, way more stronger than just like granting immunity to disarm. Now, like in my case, like as an enchanter, it very well may be that being a dwarf enchanter might not really be the most like OP race class combination. I'm not obsessed with min-maxing. I just want to play what's fun for me, and dwarves are fun and enchanters are fun, so why not put them together? So, all these from an enchanter perspective, more hit points is always a good thing no matter what you are. Acclimation and cold resistance seems like pretty much always a good thing. Blunt weaponry skills. Enchanters will use staves, and as we have talked about before, this in Pantheon, the way Pantheon's combat is designed, it's especially with techniques and stuff, it's very likely that it might not be best for an enchanter to just stand in the back and cast spells. They might occasionally want to get in on their melee combat, and might be beneficial to have some increased skill in that. And so, yeah, I would agree. Does seem like dwarves are more tailored toward the warrior classes and tank classes and stuff, but we can still reap some benefits as an enchanter. But anyway,
anaerobic's another good example where you're always, without some kind of magical means to render you not needing to breathe at all, you're always going to be holding your breath. You're always going to have that core effect that you can't breathe. And so how long can you hold it really is the key. So yes, the answer is yes. There will always be things that cannot be fully mitigated. It's just a matter of, you know, what tier you're in and how low you can ultimately get that effect.
Awesome. So we spent some time there on climates. Let's get into fractures. So obviously not the same. We're using acclimation sort of to overcome climates. But as you said, fractures are more magical. I like to think of them as like an infestation. Maybe it's due to world collisions, perhaps the beings in an area, something that happened in an area. And we talked a little bit about items when we talked about adventuring in Pantheon. We talked about some of these like special items. So anyone who wants to get a little bit more on the items, like, I don't know, the Crown of Illumination, for example, we talked a little bit about how that would play in a fracture. But can you go a little bit more in depth on some of the fractures we're looking to implement and just what these may cause for the player?
Yeah, well, so hit on it a little bit earlier, but fractures to me are in a very similar vein as the dispositions and the traits that we plan for our NPCs, because they provide an opportunity to do surprising, unexpected things and present players with a challenge, a puzzle, a thing to contend with, to overcome that they didn't necessarily expect, that it isn't necessarily immediately apparent, like how it's meant to be dealt with. So in that sense, they're by design less straightforward than the climates as well. But yeah, I'll unpack one specifically. We've talked before about gloom, and I really like this one. I like it, just how it can exist in the world, and it will tend to be more of a, I think, a common one, if you will, that you would experience. But gloom is a fracture that exists, that comes to exist either because there is a concentration of undead in an area, and so you'll often find a gloom fracture corresponding to, you know, undead ruins, or, you know, a place where there's a lich or some kind of a concentrated population of undead, or if a gloom fracture appears more dynamically in the world, then it will often be a place where you might find undead where you didn't previously, and so you actually see undead being drawn to or actually being brought with and through and in this fracture itself. But the gloom fracture is it's meant to be. Again, I talked earlier about how, you know, with game design, you want to introduce concepts early that are less complicated, more manageable, and more easily discerned. And I think this fits that category pretty well. And so with a gloom fracture, you're going to find a couple of effects on yourself if you are within the effect radius of that fracture, and you're also going to find that the undead have effects on them. So for yourself, you're going to be constantly draining mana. Your mana is going to be constantly depleting while you're inside the radius of that effect, and healing effects on you are going to be reduced by 50%. So it's a pretty punishing place to just kind of sit inside if you're planning on just setting up a camp in there and, you know, trying to fight the undead, because also the undead that are within the radius of that effect are going to have a stat increase, a universal stat increase, and then they're also going to regenerate health rapidly after a few moments of not taking damage. And so trying to, you know, take on multiple undead while you're in that environment, if you don't have a steady means of applying damage and pressure, and especially when your, you know, mana users are having their mana depleted and you're not able to heal effectively, it can be a really nasty place. And so obviously you're going to want to approach that carefully. You're going to want to try to remove the undead from that environment to be able to deal with them, and hope that if it's not a permanently fixed fracture, because some will be, some will be permanent fixtures in the world, but the ones that are spawned more dynamically, you know, it hopes that it'll close up. if you're
Awesome.
willing to wait around and see.
So you hit on a few things there. So are there going to be tells for players when they're getting near one of these, or are they just going to all of a sudden be in it? Is there something they can look out for? Obviously with climates, we've talked a little bit about the screen manipulation. Are there just going to be cues or sounds, or just a player knowing that something bad is starting to happen? And if they keep going, maybe it's going to get worse with fractures, or is it more, I'm here?
So fractures, the first layer of that answer is fractures physically exist in the world. So there will be a visual depiction, because they're like these tears, these rips in kind of the metaphysical fabric of things. And so there many times you will be able to see the physical fracture there, and then through context clues be able to determine, okay, this is maybe what this fracture seems to be doing. Because gloom, for example, if you come across an undead ruins and you see a fracture there, and you see this kind of seething mist and this kind of gloomy looking fog over the area, then you'll make a call. If you see like this thick blanket of darkness kind of ahead of you, then that's another area. If you see these tiles in the ground and some of them kind of like shift and then phase out and disappear and then reappear, and then you may not see the physical fracture depending on where you are, but there will be those kind of context clues in most cases for you to determine, okay, it seems like something's up here. Something's, again, that unnatural phenomenon, that it should be something that kind of sparks like that's
turn around.
Something
and go.
Seems a little off here. Yeah.
Time to turn around when you're adventuring solo, sneaking around the world. I'm going to go over the other way.
Yeah.
Bolthar says this gloom idea sounds very interesting. I don't like the name fractures though. Seems unintuitive. Yeah, I could see that. Now, it's worth noting that fractures used to be called atmospheres. If you've been following Pantheon for longer than maybe a year or two, you might remember the term atmospheres, which was, and both climates and what were then called atmospheres, these have been around in the design of Pantheon since 2015. Actually, climates have even been around before that. And they changed the name from atmospheres, though, is because there was too much confusion between the two, people thinking that they were the same thing, or they were, that they were just conflating the terms. And so, which is definitely understandable, because they are, climates and atmospheres are both, they're kind of similar. And while the systems have their similarities, they're also, as we've established, very different. So they changed it to fractures, which, might be unintuitive until you really start learning about like the lore of the game and how the world of Terminus, which Pantheon takes place on, is made of several different planets that have all mysteriously collided and conjoined to form this new planet. And you think about all, these fragments of different worlds all being compressed into one, and bringing with them their different landscapes and their different gods and their different types of, like energies and their own types of mana, essentially. Some weird things start happening with that. And you start getting these very mystical kind of anomalies and occurrences, which are the fractures. So it's like these tears in the fabric of reality, which are ultimately caused by this very these very mysterious planets all colliding. So that's kind of where that comes from. And the the explanation as to why those things are happening, why have these planets all been, smushed into one, that is essentially the main storyline of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Like, that's one of the main things that we as players will have to dig into to discover and learn about. And, that's the big mystery to be solved. Like, yes, it's an open world MMO. You can do whatever you want. There's obviously lots of different, like, side stories, and it's a living world. But the big question, the big why is, why are all of these things happening? So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense then as to why they went with that term.
Yeah. Or you might just be that intrepid adventurer who wants to check things out for yourself, and or the noob who is like, hey, why don't you go check that out and see what's going
Your
on
friends send you over. Yeah, run over there.
Yes. Yeah.
Now you just sort of answered this, but again, I'm going to give them their shout outs here because let's lead into it. This is from YouTube, and this is Yokul. How common do you think fractures will be? So we kind of talked earlier about climates, being introduced fairly early, I guess you'd say. And you sort of talked about gloom being maybe one that's early. And you hinted at this, and just to clarify, because it was a quick comment, they can be dynamic spawns, I'm assuming, from what you just said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some of them will be fixtures. Some of them will be, this is part of the world. It fits the lore. It fits the context. Like it exists here. It is always here. There will be some that are like that. There will be some that have logic to where they can show up. I gave Gloom the example of Gloom being, often found where concentration of undead already are. Those areas will have, that chance for a Gloom fracture to dynamically spawn there. But then the other side of the system is that there would be, and that's why I likened it, earlier to dispositions and traits, that the goal is that these would be dynamic enough in nature to be part of the mental calculus that you're doing as you approach a dungeon, to know that we could encounter a fracture in here that we weren't expecting, or maybe that we never seen before, or didn't know that kind of fracture could form here. That could be, there's a way that certain fractures could herald the presence of a particular NPC because of what they're like and what they're doing in that area. Or again, it could just be because of the nature of Terminus. It could very well be just one of these very strange events. And that's where I think the system really can shine, is when it's plugged in a way where it can be dynamic enough to be part of that evolving of the genre, to the extent where there's more unexpected that is able to help the experience be potentially more fresh each time.
So is it?
Zolar says, I would have liked that they explained why fractures are named that way at the beginning of the show. Yeah, I was thinking I probably should have touched on that at the beginning, although yeah, I agree they should have as well. Maybe I was anticipating them, which is why I didn't. But yeah, I meant to make a point as to the term fractures is actually a fairly new term, even though the system is not new. They were renamed to try to reduce some of the confusion about using atmospheres as a term, as opposed to climates and things like that. But Bolthar says, on a separate note, could you break down major things that have changed or evolved from Brad's vision? Might need to be its own video, but after 3 more years of development, I'm curious. Yeah, that would definitely need to be its own video. Now, I have, not that long ago, I did make a video on that topic, and I will pull up the exact title. go over to youtube.com/BazGrimTV. This one is Pantheon Rise of the Fallen's vision changing. It was only made just about a year ago. 26 minutes talking about that exact topic. And because that is, I mean, it's an incredibly important topic. And I'm sure it's something that we will have to continue to talk about as time goes on. You know, and as the game, as development continues, and as the design evolves, and also as more people start to kind of come onto the scene who maybe really don't know anything about Pantheon or have not been following Pantheon in a while. Like when we get closer to alpha, I can foresee a lot of people kind of coming out of the woodwork and not really having a very good grasp as to, or even just having not very good memory as to, you know, what the original vision was back then, and thinking critically about, you know, to what degree has it changed. Because yes, there have been some things, but probably not as much as some people would think. And now, since we're talking about climates, you know, this is something, again, using the library here. I mean, this is something that was posited, the idea of these natural climates. This is January 2014. I mean, that's when the game was first announced. Like that was a Brad idea. The atmospheres / fractures didn't start showing up, I think, until 2015. But again, like, and if you're interested in this, watch the video that I made about it, or go to the library. But you know, it's incredibly critical to understand that Joppa became the creative director for Pantheon in 2015, and when he did that, you know, he was handed a high-level design document from Brad, which had some, you know, fairly basic ideas, like the climate system, but they were not very fleshed out. You know, Brad at that time, it's not like Brad had, you know, written out like the full list of what the climates would be and the different tiers and the effects that they would have and the different ways that you can acclimate to them and such. Like, I mean, he had the concept and it was a great concept, but when Joppa came onto the scene in 2015, he took that and expounded upon it. So it's you get kind of both of their inputs on that. So, you know, climates as a system was really kind of like both of their brainchild. But, you know, then of course, as time goes on too, I mean, Joppa working as creative director under Brad McQuaid, who is the chief creative officer. So it's like, you know, you get that bounce back. They worked on these things together. And, you know, even though Joppa came up with a lot of the details of that system, like it was still being approved by Brad as well. So, and you get that kind of back and forth. And then other things like the fractures, or atmospheres as they were called back then. Let's just go to the library here. Is it still? Oh no, so it's they're called fractures now. Go up to the oldest reference of it. Yeah, the first reference of it was in 2015. So that is very likely to be something that Joppa conceived of. But then again, you know, he worked side by side with Brad for years. So even though Joppa may have come up with the idea, he was still, again, bouncing it back and forth between Brad. And, you know, that time period, that 2015, 2016, you know, those years were when a lot of these core systems were, you know, originally conceptualized and, you know, designed, and where they established these design documents. And, you know, it's not until more recently that they've started to, you know, they've gotten to a point where the design is solid enough, you know, and they have actually, you know, finalized, this is how we're going to be approaching it, you know, and it's not so much of an iterative thing. If you've ever designed even like a card game or a board game before, you know that the first design that you come up with is not necessarily the best, and it really takes a lot of, you know, getting input from other people and really thinking about it over time and how it interacts with other systems and things, until you really get something that's actually solid. And then of course there's always the playtesting aspect as well, but which is a big part of it. But you know, just because we're talking about these things in 2023, I mean, these systems are deep in Pantheon's DNA. So anyway, I could talk about that for a long time. And you're right, I will have to do another video about that sometime, because that's I'm glad you brought it up. It is very important. I can never turn down an opportunity to at least touch on that, because it's very important to understand how these things got to where they are. But for now, let us return to the parting the veil here. So we've got about 20 minutes left of their discussion, but we'll see how many times you keep distracting me.
It's safe to say that you're in a dungeon, a rare spawn pops, and all of a sudden you're starting to get senses of fracture, and that could kind of be a cool thing as well.
It could be, because both with climates and fractures, we want, you know, there to be time.
This reminds me of, like, you remember in high school or something, like the kids in the class would all conspire to just like get the teacher talking about something because like there was going to be like a quiz or something that day that the class wants to like want to delay. Like I know I had this. We had a teacher, like a history teacher, who was very easy to like get him telling stories, get him off track, telling, you know, on these rabbit trails and stuff. So it's like we didn't want to get into whatever he had planned. It's like somebody would just ask, like, so how do you feel about like blah blah blah, like completely out of the blue, but like he would take it, and we're just like, we're sitting there, we actually don't care what he has to say, but we're like, oh, thank God. Like that's what I feel like you guys are doing to me.
With encounters, with NPC abilities, with the ability for, you know, certain NPCs, especially when we talk about like bosses and you know, larger encounters like that they could actually, you know, form a rift and or change the climate of a room, that type of thing.
Awesome. The next question here is an interesting one, and this has been brought up a lot ever since you sort of explained fractures, or when they were called atmospheres previously. Some community members, and this is from Reddit and from the Wingless, some community members had a vision of this, just like defaulting to what they've experienced in the past to be like, and you've used the term rifts, but like rifts from the game of the same name. Not sure how familiar you are with the game. I played that a lot. I have not ever gotten a sense that these are anything alike. But do you think there's a commonality at all to what people experienced in that other game, or is it just completely different? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So I've never played Rift. Through osmosis, I've kind of gathered a good bit of information and context about it. And what Rift sound like to me in Rift is something similar to like public events in Guild Wars 2 or Destiny 2, where there are places where these rifts can open, and when they open, these specific things happen, and anyone who's nearby can come and engage with it. And it's kind of an event that starts and finishes, but it always kind of happens.
It's almost like a mini game. It's almost like you see it, you start it, it's a community event, it's a mini game, it's over, you collect your experience. For most of the time, that's how it was.
So to some degree, like I can understand where there would be some connections, some familiarity that people who could see or feel between the two. One of the biggest differences for me, and it's not the first time I've heard this, and I've given it some thought, and because obviously I don't want to just be it's the same thing they do there. But one of the biggest differences for me has been that the system in Rift seems to be very much centered around an event where NPCs kind of invade, and there's a lot of it's always centered around this combat scenario with this influx of NPCs that need to be defeated, and if they're not defeated, then you
lose out on the
bad
reward. It goes away. Yeah.
Okay. So one immediate difference for me is that fractures they can be combat related, but they can also exist as just strange obstacles and just ways to and kind of intrinsically change the accesses or the exploration paradigms of an area, and sometimes in kind of a puzzling or puzzle-like way. So that's one, I think, important distinction. It doesn't mean that there aren't fractures that are, combat oriented or could in some ways feel like a I don't want to say like an invasion, because it's not necessarily like that, but
it exists already, sort of, right? So it's there.
Yeah, but they can dynamically form though too, and with the ones that dynamically form, we have plans for there to be events associated in some cases with that happening. So it's not like that won't ever be the case. It's just going to be one of the ways that could go in Pantheon. The other, I guess,
I see them tied a lot more to lore, though.
They like can be, lore, but not necessarily. Like
not like deep lore, but like world lore, like the being of the world. And you've talked in the past about like where fractures really come into play is like our world is like this collision of worlds, right? Like these magical pieces of world have hit each other, and these things have happened to Terminus, where it's sort of the planet lashing out, so to speak, in some of these areas as well.
Well, yeah, it's playing off the idea that when you have different realms, different worlds, different,
there you go,
like energies and just kind of the primordial soup of what those worlds are, when they clash together, they can be in some cases a very discordant kind of coalescing that can cause these instabilities and ultimately these tears and fractures to occur. But we yes, there will be some that are very lore driven, lore heavy, lore connected, and those will be the ones especially that are those fixtures in the world that are there to tell a story. But so then it
seems like they're a lot more dynamic.
Well, we want
fractures are very dynamic. Yeah. So it's not kind of you when you encounter it, you don't really know right away what experience you're going to get. I think maybe the difference, and I played Rift a lot. The difference with Rift was you sort of knew what you were getting into. We're trying to make these a little less predictable, and it won't be the same gameplay loop. It's going to be different gameplay loops. Maybe even the same type of fracture, but a different gameplay loop that it brings.
Well, the loop that's a big part of it, because the loop, again, I haven't played it, but it sounds like in Rift, a lot of that's why it reminded me of Destiny 2, because with these public events that happen, your goal is essentially to just kill the enemies. In Pantheon, like a lot of these fractures, that's where the artifact piece comes into play, because there's these specific items that exist that in some cases make it possible to engage with the effect of the fracture, period. We're not afraid for some of them to really exist as these hard kind of like, I can't see where I'm going and no one else in my group can, so I guess we're out of luck. And so the incentive to go and find like a ring of, or a crown of illumination, or something that is going to enable you to access areas that you couldn't otherwise. I mean, that's a big difference. It's also some of the things we want to do as far as incentivizing engaging with some of the activities with the fractures, where if it is a fracture that causes a unique population of NPCs to spawn, or it triggers some kind of event, then the idea is like we want players to be excited to happen upon things like that, because there could be things that drop only specifically when that kind of thing happens. So it's not just this rote thing that's happening, like clockwork, or that you can always, it's just always kind of the same thing, but it's also the chance of looting something unique, whether it's loot or whether it's an item that begins a quest line, or there's so many different ways to imbue kind of an excitement and an anticipation with that. But again, it's not always combat related. So I think there's some pretty substantial differences between the two.
Yeah, it sounds like it's
Yeah, I'm digging the term primordial soup myself. I think we're gonna have to remember that one. Maybe we'll put that on a bingo card. Because that's great. It sounds like it could be like a band name or something too. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, primordial soup. Like I can see that. I can see that. Or just, next time somebody asks you, like, so tell me about Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. It's like, well, it's basically a primordial soup of different planetary structures. I think that's got some legs.
me again, and I played it a lot. I got a couple world firsts in that. So well, flexing.
Congratulations.
Yeah, right.
Solar says I'm stealing that name from my guild. Do it. I will be so jealous. I shouldn't have given you that idea. That is a great name. That's a great name for a guild. I fully expect to see that. That term's going to come back someday, no doubt.
So a couple quick questions here from the community, and then we'll sort of wrap up with the last couple questions I have for you. So this one is from Doug Bug from our forums. And you hinted at this one too. Can a fracture be fixed or cured in an area?
I mean, we don't have plans for that right now. Like you're not going to go up to the fracture and be able to click on it and interact with it and close it up. So I would have to say no. Like that's not part of like what's
even if you were to
right
like defeat that challenge of a dynamic one.
I mean, that would be the only one that would have kind of an ending criteria, I guess you could say. So in that sense, you could see the fracture maybe close up. If it is specifically intrinsically connected to an event,
or
and that event being
an
NPC being present and needing to be slain, that kind of thing. So I guess in that sense, yeah, but I'd be hesitant to say that, that means there's a way to like fix fractures or,
So you're saying like the more ones that are omnipresent, they're always there. Expect it to be there. Like those ones anyway. Okay.
And the ones that are more dynamic that aren't combat related, the plan with those is being more time based. But meaning that, if there's an absolute or an advanced darkness fracture or something that shows up in an area, it'll persist there for a time. If it's not meant to be there permanently, it'll persist there for a time, and then it'll naturally go away. And
Bell says there should be a soup in game called Primordial Soup. Yes, Nefel, if you're watching, do it. That put that in game. Provisioners. I don't even know what the ingredients for that would be, but Primordial Soup. That get on that. Mordred says, will there not be a Basgrim's Brawler guild? No, it would be called Bazzers. No, I don't know. You know, people ask me sometimes, like, if I'm gonna lead a guild in game, and I just genuinely don't know. Like, leading a guild, doing it well, takes a lot of time. Like, that can be a whole, like, full-time job of its own sometimes. And frankly, I just don't know if I'm gonna have that sort of time. I don't know if that's where, like, my passion is. Like, I mean, I definitely, for all of you who tune in regularly, I mean, I would love to have a way that we can keep in touch in game, and a guild is a logical way of doing that. I know like Pantheon Plus is gonna have their own guild and stuff, but I just, before I commit to that, I just kind of like want to wait and see what it'll be like. I haven't committed to any guild, joining, creating one of my own, or joining somebody else's, or anything like that. So So yeah, we're just gonna have to wait and see until we can get more people like in game, and see what it's like. See how much of an investment it would be to lead a guild, what guilds are like in Pantheon, and and where my like YouTube channel is at that point, and Twitch and the library of Pantheon. These already kind of like commitments that I already have that take a lot of time to maintain, and but that really is where my focus is right now, and will continue to be, is helping just kind of educate people about Pantheon on YouTube or Twitch or wherever that may be. So yeah, we'll see, but yeah, feel free to hit me with some name suggestions if we ever get to that. Basgrim's Reapers or something. or we have the on the channel, on the Twitch channel, we have the Seeker, who is kind of like our mascot. He's the robed individual that you see during the Twitch intro and throughout the channel and stuff. So we could be like could do something like that. Have like a guild of seekers. That's over on our Patreon page, we already have kind of like tiers. Like, you think of it kind of almost like as a secret society, and there's different like ranks that you can have over on the Patreon page, all the way up to the Luminary. The Luminary is like the highest tier that we have currently. So yeah, there's definitely some pretty cool potential for that. The bookkeepers, I do like that. The librarians.
I know the question has come up too. Maybe, well, I'll stop because this may be one you've already asked. If we don't end up asking it, then I'll
sure
bring it back up.
So this will be our last community question here. And this is from
the next one.
Yeah, this is from from Instagram, and this is from Daily Photo DK. They are asking, can they potentially be activated by players?
Yes. So the answer to that is yes. They can be activated. Some of them will be activated through quest completions. Some will be activated through, again, the dynamic events, certain boss raid encounters, things like that. So yeah, there's a few ways that players can initiate the forming of a fracture.
It's awesome. I already am starting to think like long quest lines or legendary quest lines that we're all kind of excited about. And okay, guys, I need to open this fracture. I need everybody here to help me. Like, that's kind of a cool thing. Okay, so last couple of questions are from me here. So, I mean, obviously, anybody who's listened and through this talk, these systems create challenge in our world. But ultimately, if you had to like sort of evangelize their importance to Terminus and to the Pantheon experience, I've always felt on a personal level that these are really important core dynamics to the world. So I'm kind of curious on how you would define them to the overall experience.
So much of what we are striving to do is the goal of creating layers to the content of the world, to try and keep the experience of playing and existing in Pantheon fresh and enjoyable, and ultimately replayable. I think that's one of the biggest issues that MMOs face, in a way, because they're designed to be perpetual game worlds that persist and allow you to, inhabit for long periods of time. They're not single player games that start and have an ending. And because of their perpetual nature, you are going to the same places over and over and over again. And so one of the really captivating things about MMOs, in that sense, becomes one of its struggles, because how do you keep the same world in the same places feeling fresh and interesting and engaging? So climates and fractures are another part of the layering that we're trying to introduce to, evolve the way that the game world presents itself, or potentially presents itself on any given day, to keep that sense of freshness going, to keep that sense of, I'm still interested to go to this area and see what it's going to be like, because of these different criteria that can exist there. So I think that's probably the best way to sum up why I think these systems are so important to what is going to make Pantheon unique, but it's also needing to see that in the context of the other systems that are aiming to do the same thing in different ways.
Awesome. So almost done here. You brought up the word, which is awesome. It's almost like you were cheating. What do you say to people who feel acclimation or the artifacts that help people travel within fractures are sort of a form of gating? You brought up gating earlier. And it's weird. I think within the MMO community, there's people who see gating as a bad thing. I do not, if done right. So for you, and responding to that message, number one, what do you say to them, and is it a bad thing? And where is that come into like sort of the design of the game?
I just don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's, for me, it's often a compelling part of the experience, because I don't know what my Bartle score is or whatever, but for me, I am very drawn to the sense of wanting to be able to reach certain pinnacles of progression. And I feel like I've said this a lot, and I hope that it makes sense the way I understand it in my head, but that the idea of a world opening up more and more to you over time is a big part of, it's essentially just a fancier way to just say it's gated, but it is intrinsically woven into the experience of developing and progressing as a character. So I don't think gating is a bad word. I just think it's just a word that describes what I believe can be a very enjoyable, natural process of opening up more of the world to you. We're designing Pantheon specifically to allow for, I think, a lot more of that sense of unbridled exploration than I think people probably expected, in the way that we're handling a lot of the overland areas, a good portion of the overland areas. We want that to be, we want you to be able to explore. We want you to be able to be aware of the places that you're not going to fare very well if you venture into, and there will certainly be many of those kinds of places. But I think it is a gating system, absolutely.
I think going back, and I don't mean to cut you off, sorry with that, but I think
why does gating have such like a negative connotation? Like who said that's a bad thing? It's a good thing. It's a necessary thing. Like, is this something that has come from like MMO players that just have no patience and they just want to be allowed to go anywhere whenever they want, and that sort of like entitlement nonsense. Like, why would gating be a bad thing? Like, maybe it's just an assumption that has developed from a lot of MMOs that have done gating poorly, and by that I mean, like, I will agree, like, if the gating is arbitrary, then yeah, that's not very interesting. And it can just kind of like feel bad, you know? Like if it's certainly some sort of like an invisible wall or some sort of just like really like obscure, you know, steps that you need to go through to get some like item or something before you can click on a portal to access a certain area or something, with, you know, with, if there's really not like a good justification for it, then yeah, that can feel kind of bad. But like, that doesn't mean that all forms of gating are bad. If you could just explore the entire world whenever you wanted, then you would get so bored of the game so much more quickly. It just kills the longevity of a game. You know, you need to have that carrot on the end of the stick that is, you know, compelling you to work toward being able to reach this area that you can't reach. You know, and there should, you know, there should be a logical path to that. And in fact, I think climates and fractures are more of actually kind of like a softer form of gating. I mean, it still can accomplish the same end result, but it, you know, it's, for one thing, it's more intuitive in that it like makes sense, because, you know, we just kind of intuitively understand like weather and extreme climates, and, you know, why not anybody can just go to the top of Mount Everest whenever they want to. But it also, the way that they have it set up with the different tiers and the different forms of acclimation and the different penalties and such, like, it gives you more choices. It's not just an on-off switch. It's not like you cannot access this area. Okay, now you did this thing. Now you can access this area. It gives you a choice, and it's much more gradual. Like, you can, even without any form of acclimations, particularly in a lower tier climate, like, you can start to go into that area. You might not make it very far, or, you know, maybe you do make it far, but you have these other penalties that you need to contend with. But that puts the choice in your hands as the player. It makes you make those decisions. It makes you figure out how you're gonna contend with that. That's like, to me, when you have to have gating, like, that's a smart way of going about it. It's just a much more interesting way of going about it. You know, the more interesting decisions that you can put in the player's hands, like, that's good game design right there. So, yeah, don't think of gating in such a negative way. It is a necessary aspect of these types of games.
You gave a great example to this. I want to go back to, because it really resonated for me, and I think a lot of gamers will get it. There's a difference between when something you just can't progress because it's not in the game, or you can't progress because they don't want you to. You know, the world's going to be open for you to try, and if you go get the stuff, you can get there, right? You have to go earn the right to get to some of these areas. What you've talked about before is we want to keep the world alive. You see so many zones in MMORPGs that are just dead. You're there to get your couple levels and you never go back. But having these areas in low level zones or early on in your level, I can't get there yet, but I'm coming back. You better bet I'm coming back when I get my gear. It brings high levels into the lower level areas. It creates player interactions. It creates some carrots on a stick, let's be honest, when you see that person in amazing gear. But one of the things you've always talked about is, of course, Zelda, right? And I know I'm gonna mess up the name of this item because I'm a fan, but not as much as you. But
Okay.
you see the rocks, right? In almost every Zelda game, there's rocks that need to go away. And you either blow them up with a bomb or you get the bracelet to pick them up. Is it the power bracelet? Is that what it is? Am I wrong? Glove? Power? I don't know what it is. But
The Titan's Mitt.
yeah, okay. I remember I think in the Game Boy Link's Awakening, I thought you had a
There is a
bracelet.
power bracelet.
Yeah. So and you saw that you could go over there and someday you're going to come back. And you sort of have always related it to that experience. So I always thought that was a great way of putting it. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that, but I appreciated that explanation of it.
Yeah, for sure. It's I think it gets a bad rap when you're talking about these long, arduous keying quests where you have to spend hours and days and weeks like getting a key to, this one dungeon. And it's like keys are cool. I like keys. But I like the idea of soft and hard caps or hard gates kind of mingled together, where if you want to venture into a frigid climate, for example, you can. But the reality of where you are is going to start to take effect. So it's no different from a key in a sense, in a very sterile kind of on paper sense, I guess. But my hope and my expectation is that in practice, it really is meant to be the manifestation of conquering and opening up more of the world and it reaching pinnacles of your progression and your journey as a player, where you're able to stand on that frost-capped mountain with the winds howling around you, and you're
Someone
not
can see you from a distance and like, wow, look at that
with
guy.
your cape flapping in the wind and the thousands of bodies you've felled on your way up, kind of thing, of course. But
Yeah, Nimrel says depends on what type of gating. If it's like eye level, I don't agree with. Which, okay, that's a great example. Now, I mean, we could talk a lot about why eye levels just in general are a terrible game design decision. But things like that, again, and like Balthar says, arbitrary is the key word in the normal resistance to gating. I think that really is like the heart of it, where if you have something as arbitrary as like, oh, you can't enter this dungeon unless your eye level is 675 or whatever the case may be, like when players are presented with that, it just is glaringly obvious that is just laziness on the developer's decision. Like it's obvious what they're doing. They're just stalling you. They're delaying you. They're preventing you from accessing this area until you go spend a whole bunch of time doing these other things. It's just, I mean, that's just a super lazy approach. Whereas opposed to something like climates, I mean, they've developed this whole entire complex system just for gating. Because again, gating is necessary, but they've put in the time and the creativity to do it in a way where it feels more organic. You might not even really realize that you're being gated from a particular area because, again, it is intuitive. It just makes more sense that like, okay, I can't access this because the weather is too extreme, as opposed to like, you mean I literally can't step foot in this dungeon because the dungeon somehow magically knows that my gear isn't good enough? Like that, something stupid like that just pulls you out of the world, and players don't like that. Even if you're not like an immersion junkie, there's always that part of your brain that is like, this, it just doesn't feel right. Where climates, though, again, it just feels much more natural, no pun intended.
yeah, I mean that's a really cool moment, and definitely want there to be moments like that for sure.
Well, Chris, you have covered in depth. This is hopefully a lot of clarity for people who have pieced together different comments we've made or this and that and more up to date. Is there anything else you want to say to these topics before we close out the episode, or do you feel good?
I mean, I think the Power Glove was the NES actual glove, right? That you
The
was that
regular
the movie The
NES.
Wizard?
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you have,
Oh,
like,
when he,
buttons.
yeah. I bought one of those. Did you have one?
No, I never had one of those.
It was painful.
I
think I've seen those.
Wanted one of those.
It was so painful. I used to try to play Rad Racer and Punch Out with it. And it was so heavy, you had to hold your hand straight because you had those little sensors on the TV. So you had to hold your hand up, and it was heavy. And I was a kid. It wasn't fun at all. So it's no surprise that didn't work out. So, all right, guys. Well, I want to thank everybody in the community for joining us. Chris, as always, thank you. It's these conversations go very quickly for me. We just did about an hour, and it didn't seem like anything. It's really fun to get into these things and create clarity. And again, that's what this show is for. It's a conversation. It's out there in podcast form. So for those of you that want to get some of these in podcast form, listen to your car, listen to it at work when you're not supposed to. Any of that stuff. It's in podcast form. We'll have it uploaded on YouTube. But just again, thank you to the entire community for hanging out with us when we have these talks. It's a lot of fun. As always, we just thank you to everybody who pledges and helps us build this game. If you're interested in looking at the options, it's pantheonmmo.com. There's a lot of different options on there. But as always, just following us as well on the different social media you saw tonight, with all the people we were able to highlight. You can check us out on those different social media, see when we do fun events, giveaways, conversations, and obviously keep up with our monthly content. Next up is our newsletter. So next week you'll see our newsletter, and we'll have some different stuff to update the alpha roadmap on there, and a few other fun little things for the community. So just everybody, thank you. Really fun time tonight. Chris, thank you. And,
it's a blast.
So thank you, everybody. That is Climates and Fractures. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks all.
Yeah, that was a really fun discussion. Definitely a lot to think about there. Tumaden says I have to go weigh the pros and cons about different races for druids now. I wish if there was one thing that this stream was lacking, it was more details about how druids played into the climate system. Like, I know they mentioned some classes being able to provide buffs that increase your acclimation to different climates. And I think it makes a lot of sense that druids would be able to do that. Which would be helpful for sure, but that's not necessarily as interesting or as powerful or unique as, like, what if druids could create their own climates? I'm pretty sure there's not anything like that on their page, Druid, on their class page on the website. I can just do it. Yeah, doesn't look like anything confirmed, but like, I mean, how cool would that be? And it makes a lot of sense in the traditional druids again, and them being able to not even just contend with the weather, but literally be able to like control the weather. And obviously, there'd have to be some pretty significant limitations to that and the amount of area and the duration that they could. But like, being able to create a small, like frigid climate or something, because the mobs that you're going up against are particularly vulnerable to that sort of thing. That would be really cool. That, I feel like that would be kind of a pretty cool selling point for Pantheon. Come play a druid where you can control the weather. Like, that's awesome. I get it. There's some balancing that needs to be done with that, but could be cool. I'm trying to remember if they have like. Let me look it up in the library. Like, trying to think if there was any sort of like confirmation that druids would be able to do that. Can druids affect lightning strikes? Oh, this is 2019. From Joppa, though. We'll see what he has to say. Come on. Oh, what are all these ads for? This is not what I want. That says Archai also give buffs for acclamation too. Oh, that's true. Oops, let's see. Let's see. That's not the link that I clicked on. Or did I just miss it? Oh, so that's it? That's the answer? Oh wait, I didn't even realize that it's muted. All right,
Druids be able to for the next few, just while we finish up. So nice lightning strikes. Will druids be able to affect it?
Yes.
That's all he says. Just yes. No explanation. I mean, there you have it. I mean, it's one word, and it's from 2019, but like, I mean, kind of seems like there's something there. Anyway, I think that about does it for this time. Where are we at? What's our time coming in at? Little less than 2.5 hours. You guys tried. I knew you were trying to get me to 4 hours. Didn't quite make it on this one. But it was still very, very fun nonetheless. And what do you say we do it again next month? Before then, though, we have as Minus said, we have the newsletter coming up, which is always very exciting. That always brings, a lot of updates, which then get translated into the Library of Pantheon. So, again, I would love it for you guys to head on over to librarypantheon.com. Take advantage of all the free information that's laid out there, where you find some answers to your questions. We'll maybe learn something new about Pantheon. And then we can talk about it next time we get together. How does that sound? So, thank you once again. You have been an absolute blast to hang out with. I hope to see you around the community. Till then, everybody, please stay curious and adventure on.